2013 budget. As you know, most of these omnibus bills don't really relate to the budgets. This was Bill C4. It was 400 some pages. If there was a theme to it, it was taking aim at public sector workers and rights to collective bargaining. But there were other sections as well. It also removed from the Canada Labour Code, it weakened the right to refuse unsafe work. I'm not quite sure what they were on about there. There's fewer than 24 cases a year of people refusing unsafe work under the Canadian Labour Code, but they've weakened the definition of what dangerous is. They also, under this piece of legislation, got rid of the Canadian International Development Agency. So CEDA was eliminated in the text of Budget 2013, but the legislation to implement that was brought forward in Bill C4 this fall. CEDA is now subsumed within the activities of CEDA. It's no longer described as CEDA. Yeah, so we're still doing a development assistance, but they say now that development assistance is primarily for the purpose not of poverty alleviation, but of promoting Canadian business overseas, and that it's now it's part of the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, which is now renamed Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. Wow. So that was also in Bill C4. There was also the sale. This is one of the ways that Flaherty wants to get out of the deficit by the election in 2015. They've said they'll be out of deficit. And they're selling off assets of the people of Canada to do so. Gold coins, Canada House in London, England. And most of those things never come before the House of Commons because they're government assets and they can sell them at will. But there's something called the Dominion coal lands, and they are in the ecologically sensitive area of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. They're part of the Crown of the Continent. There's been a lot of effort to create an additional national park in that area. It's federally owned land ever since the negotiations to build the railroad. So we actually had to amend the Crow's Nest Pass Act in order to open the doors to sell tens of thousands of hectares of federally owned land in southeastern BC for coal mining. So it's metallurgical coal. That was also part of what went through the House quickly in the omnibus budget bill. A few other things, one obviously not connected to the budget at all, was retroactive legislation to try to clean up the appointment of a completely unsuitable Supreme Court judge named Marc Nadon for Quebec. I say he's unsuitable because as a lawyer I've looked at his CV, and all of Harper's previous Supreme Court appointments, I've got to say, were pretty good choices. But Nadon's only distinguishing jurisprudence was a dissent on the case that related to Omar Khadr, where he said his rights weren't violated. He's an admiralty lawyer. I don't think he has the right stuff to be on the bench, but he also didn't fit the law for how you appoint a judge from Quebec. So they amended that post facto in C4. We also had bills go through on cluster munitions. This was the first time I've been involved at the committee level where we actually got the government to accept changes. Cluster munitions bill, which is going through the House, is there to implement the Cluster Munitions Treaty, which Canada signed some time ago, but we hadn't yet ratified it. As you can imagine, the purpose of a Cluster Munitions Treaty is to ban cluster munitions. So the implementing legislation for Canada said Canada will no longer use, transport, purchase, et cetera, cluster munitions. No Canadian can use them in a theater